Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking an absolutely incredible journey into the biological machinery that makes us who we are. We're going to explore the very foundation of your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, starting from a single electrical spark and zooming all the way out to the grand blueprint that makes you, well, you. So here's our game plan. We're going to start super small with the microscopic spark of just one cell. Then we'll zoom out to see how these cells form massive, body-wide networks. From there, we'll take a tour of the command center, the brain itself. And finally, we'll look at the genetic code that writes the instructions for the whole show. Okay, let's dive right in, starting at the most fundamental level you can get. We're talking about the single building block of your entire nervous system, the neuron. Think about it. Every memory you cherish, every feeling you have, every single time you decide to move your arm, it all begins right here, with this one type of cell. And they come in a few different flavors depending on their job. Sensory neurons are the scouts, gathering info. Motor neurons are the soldiers, carrying out orders. And inner neurons are the crucial go-betweens, connecting everything together. So, how does one of these neurons actually do anything? Well, it fires through a process called an action potential. And you can think of it, just like a line of dominoes. The neuron just sits there in its resting state, all charged up and ready to go. When it gets a strong enough signal, it tips that first domino, triggering this incredible chain reaction, that's the spark, that zips down its entire length. And just as fast, it resets itself, ready to fire all over again. Now, here's a detail that might just blow your mind. Neurons don't even touch each other to pass the message along. Nope, there's this tiny, tiny gap between them called a synapse. The signal has to literally leap across that empty space. It really is like jump-starting a car. The energy gets transferred through the cables, but the cars themselves never ever make physical contact. So, how in the world does the signal make that jump? It uses these little chemical couriers called neurotransmitters. You've probably heard of some of them. Dopamine, for instance, is a huge player in pleasure and movement, which is why when it's out of balance, it's linked to things like Parkinson's. Then there's serotonin, which helps regulate your mood. That's the one a lot of antidepressants target. These molecules literally shape how we feel and function moment to moment. Okay, so a single neuron is amazing, but the real magic happens when they team up. Let's zoom out. We're talking billions of them all connecting to form this vast, unbelievably intricate network that we call the nervous system. And we can basically split this whole web into two major parts. First up, you've got the central nervous system, the CNS. That's command central, your brain and your spinal cord. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. That's the sprawling network of nerves branching out from the center, like messengers carrying information to and from every single part of your body. Now, that peripheral system, that messenger network, it has two different departments. Your somatic system handles all the voluntary stuff. Anything you consciously decide to do, like snapping your fingers or typing an email, that's the somatic system at work. At the same time, your autonomic system is in the background, taking care of all the automatic processes you never think about, like your heart beating or your lungs breathing. And if we dig just one level deeper, that autonomic system has two different modes, an accelerator and a brake. The sympathetic system is the gas pedal. It's your fight or flight response. Ever feel your heart pound before a big presentation? That's your sympathetic system, getting you all revved up. Its partner, the parasympathetic system, is the brake pedal. It's the rest and digest mode that calms everything back down. And now we've arrived at headquarters, the command center for this entire incredible network. The brain. We're talking about the most complex object we know of in the entire universe, and it's sitting right inside your head. You can kind of think of the brain's architecture in three basic layers, built up over evolutionary time. Way down at the base is the hindbrain. This is the old school part, the life support system that keeps you breathing and your heart beating. Above that, the midbrain acts like a relay station for sensory info. And then you have the forebrain, the biggest and most complex part, where all the higher level stuff like thinking, feeling, and dreaming happens. Okay, but let's be real. When you picture a brain, what's the first thing you think of? All those folds and wrinkles, right? So why? Why on earth does it look like that? The answer is actually pretty genius. It's all about real estate. Those wrinkles are folds in the cerebral cortex, which is the brain's outer thinking layer. If you could take that layer and unfold it, it would be about the size of a big pillowcase. So evolution's clever solution was to just crumple it all up to pack an insane amount of processing power into the tiny space of our skulls. This powerful, wrinkly cortex is divided into four main sections, or lobes, each with its own specialty. Right up front, behind your forehead, is the frontal lobe. That's the CEO's office, handling planning and judgment. Then you have the parietal lobe, which processes sensations. In the very back, the occipital lobe is your visual center, and on the sides, the temporal lobes are key for hearing and forming memories. And a big reason we know what that frontal lobe does is because of one of the most famous and kind of gruesome cases in neuroscience history. Back in the 1800s, a railroad worker named Phineas Gage had this horrific accident where a huge iron rod shot right through his skull. Miraculously, he survived. But his friends said he was no longer Gage. He went from a responsible guy to someone impulsive and profane, giving us the first solid evidence that our very personality is housed right there in the frontal lobe. So all this talk of specialized brain regions brings us to a really popular idea I'm sure you've heard a million times. The idea that you're either a logical, left-brained person or a creative, right-brained person. But is there any truth to that? The short answer, no. It's a total myth. I mean, it's true that the two hemispheres of the brain have their specialties. Language processing tends to hang out on the left, for example. But for any complex task, whether it's doing math or painting a masterpiece, you're using your whole brain. The two sides are in constant communication. So really, we're all whole-brained thinkers. All right, for our final section, we are zooming out as far as we possibly can. We're going all the way down to the fundamental instructions, the biological code that tells your body how to build this entire incredible system in the first place, our genes. Now, to get this, there are just two key terms you need to know. First is your genotype. That's the specific set of genetic instructions you carry, the actual code. Then there's your phenotype. That's the observable result of those instructions, the traits you can actually see and measure. So your genotype has the code for brown eyes, but your phenotype is the actual brown eyes people see. And this brings us to the modern answer to that classic, age-old debate. Is it nature or is it nurture? Well, the truth is, it's not one or the other. It's always both. The whole field of behavior genetics is dedicated to understanding this complex dance between our genes, our nature, and our environment, our nurture, to see how they work together to shape who we become. You know, as our ability to read this genetic code gets more and more powerful, it leaves us with some really profound, really personal questions. We can now identify genes linked to certain diseases, which is powerful for sure, but it also creates some deep ethical dilemmas. So I'll leave you with this to think about. If you could read your own biological blueprint from start to finish, would you really want to know everything it has to say?